The blade sliced through the air where Ivor's head had been a heartbeat before. He dropped, rolled, and came up behind the automated combat drone as its momentum carried it past. His hands found the weak point between its armor plates. The drone crumpled with a satisfying crunch of metal and circuitry. Around him, the training arena of Bloodwick Academy fell silent. The other students had stopped their own combat sequences to watch. None of them had ever seen anyone dismantle a Mark 7 combat drone with their bare hands. Ivor straightened, wiping machine oil from his knuckles. The drone lay in pieces at his feet, its red targeting lights fading to black. Someone began clapping. Slow, deliberate applause that echoed through the vast training chamber. He turned to see 3 figures approaching through the crowd of students. They moved together but separately, each with a distinct presence that commanded attention in its own way. The first was tall and graceful, with the distinctive blue-black skin and silver markings of the Cathurian race. Her eyes were the color of deep space, sharp with analytical intelligence. Everything about her spoke of precision and calculated lethality. The second seemed to drift rather than walk, her movements so fluid they appeared almost liquid. Her pale gray skin seemed to absorb light, making her edges indistinct, as if she existed partially in shadow. When she moved, it was without sound. The third radiated an energy that made the other students unconsciously step back. Her dark red skin was marked with intricate black patterns that seemed to shift in the light. Her eyes held something that made even combat veterans look away. They reached the edge of the combat circle and stopped. The crowd of students parted around them like water around stones. Even here, at the most exclusive academy in the sector, these 3 commanded respect. Their names were whispered throughout Bloodwick. Nithra, the pattern breaker who could see through any deception. Vexhai, the silence weaver who moved like liquid shadow. Mortes, the fear harvester who weaponized terror itself. The Academy's elite, born for this, bred for it, trained since childhood. Unlike him, Nithra gestured toward the destroyed drone. Your technique is crude. Her voice carried the musical quality common to her species, but there was steel underneath. She spoke without moving closer, maintaining the careful distance that separated the elite from the expendable. Crude but effective, he brushed more debris from his hands. The drones disabled. Vexhai tilted her head, studying him with pale eyes that seemed to see more than they should. You fight like something desperate. The observation stung because it was accurate. Humans always fought like they were desperate. That was the point. That was what made them dangerous. Around the training floor, other students continued their exercises, but Ivor could feel their attention. The human who'd somehow earned admission to Bloodwick. The anomaly, the one who didn't belong. He'd been here 3 months, and the novelty still hadn't worn off. Mortes stepped forward, and several nearby students immediately moved away. There was something about her that triggered primal responses, even in trained killers. Tomorrow's final trial. Her voice was softer than the others, but carried an undertone that made hearts race. You know what they say about humans in the last round. He knew. Humans didn't survive the final trial. Not at Bloodwick. The Academy had been training the galaxy's deadliest operatives for over 2 centuries, and in all that time, no human had ever graduated. They said humans broke under pressure. That they couldn't maintain the level of controlled violence required for extended operations. That they were too emotional, too unpredictable, too dangerous to trust. They're probably right. He picked up his water bottle and took a long drink. About the breaking part, anyway, Nithra's expression shifted slightly. Something that might have been curiosity flickered across her features. You don't seem concerned, because I'm not. The words came out harder than he'd intended. Whatever tomorrow brings, I'll deal with it. The 3 aliens exchanged glances. Some kind of silent communication passed between them, too quick and subtle for him to interpret. Vexhai moved closer, her her steps making no sound on the training mat. There was something predatory in the way she moved, but controlled. Everything about her spoke of death delivered silently, efficiently. The final trial isn't like the others. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but somehow carried clearly. It's designed to push you past your breaking point. I don't have a breaking point. The words hung in the air between them. Other students glanced over, then quickly looked away. Even here, surrounded by the deadliest beings in the galaxy, there was something about humans that made people nervous. Everyone has limits, Mortis said, and her words carried weight that made them feel like absolute truth. Maybe, but mine aren't where you think they are. The training floor buzzed with activity around them, but in the space between the four of them, everything felt still, charged with possibility. What makes you think you're different from the others? Nithra asked. The others? He gestured toward the other students. They're here because they're supposed to be, born for this, bred for it, me. I'm here because I refuse to be anywhere else. That's not an answer. Sure it is. You want to know the difference between humans and everyone else. Everyone else knows when they're beaten. We don't. Vexai's pale eyes seemed to shimmer in the arena's light. You think that's an advantage. I think it's the only advantage that matters. Another exchange of glances between the three aliens. This time, Ivor caught something in their expressions. Not dismissal or contempt, something closer to evaluation. Tomorrow's trial will be different, Nithra said finally. They'll form squads. He felt something cold settle in his stomach. Squad trials at Bloodwick meant one thing. Teams would compete against each other in scenarios designed to test every aspect of their training. Only one squad would graduate. I know. And you're not concerned about competing against us? Mortis asked, her voice carrying an edge that made lesser beings tremble. The question hung between them like a challenge. Around the training floor, other students had stopped pretending not to listen. The human and the academy's elite, the outsider and the perfect students. It wasn't a question of concern, it was a question of survival. Should I be? The three aliens studied him for a long moment. He could feel them measuring something, calculating odds he couldn't guess at. We've never lost a trial, Vexai said quietly. Neither have I, Mortis almost smiled at that. Almost. You've been here 3 months. We've been training for this our entire lives. Training's different from surviving. He finished his water and set the bottle aside. You've been learning how to be perfect. I've been learning how to refuse to die. The distinction mattered. He could see it in their eyes, the moment they understood what he meant. Perfect technique, flawless form, optimal strategy. Everything they'd been taught assumed a level playing field. Humans didn't fight on level playing fields. You think desperation makes you stronger? Nithra asked. I think desperation makes you creative. Around them, the other students were finishing their exercises. The training session was nearly over, but none of them moved to leave. The space between them felt charged, like the moment before lightning strikes. Tomorrow won't be about strength, Vexai said. No, it'll be about who wants it more. The three aliens exchanged another look. This time, Ivor caught something different in their expressions. Not calculation or evaluation. Decision. You're not what we expected, Mortis said. What did you expect? Something more, primitive. The word stung, but he didn't let it show. Primitive was what they all thought. Humans were the newcomers, the crude species that solved problems with violence instead of diplomacy. The ones who didn't understand subtlety. Maybe we are primitive, but primitive doesn't mean weak. No, Nithra said quietly. We're beginning to understand that. The training session ended with the deep chime that echoed through the academy halls. Students began filing toward the exits, their conversations a low murmur of speculation about tomorrow's trials. The three aliens didn't move. Neither did he. The arena emptied around them, leaving just the four of them standing in the center of the combat circle. Emergency lighting cast long shadows across the training mats, and the air recyclers hummed softly in the silence. "Why are you really here?" Nithra's question was softer now, without the formal edge she'd maintained before. "Same reason as you, to prove something." "What?" "That humans belong in the galaxy." Vexhai considered that, "And if you fail, then I fail." "But I won't quit, even if it kills you," Mortis asked, "especially if it kills you." The words came out with more force than he'd intended, but they were true. That was what nobody understood about humans. They didn't fight to win. They fought to fight. Another exchange of glances between the three aliens. This time, when they looked back at him, something had changed. "The Academy pairs squads randomly," Nithra said, "but sometimes students can request specific partnerships." Ivor felt his pulse quicken. "Are you suggesting what I think you're suggesting?" "We're suggesting that maybe the galaxy needs to see what happens when predators hunt together," Vexhai said. "You'd want me on your squad?" Mortis stepped closer, and for the first time, her presence didn't radiate menace. Instead, it felt like acceptance. "We want to see what happens when someone who refuses to die works with people who never lose." "Partners?" he asked. All three of them nodded. Partners. The next morning arrived with the soft chime that marked the beginning of each academy day. Ivor woke before the alarm, as he always did, and went through his morning routine. Exercise, nutrition, mental preparation. But today felt different. Today, he wouldn't be facing the trial alone. The final trial would take place in the Crucible, the Academy's most advanced training facility, a constantly shifting environment designed to test every skill a graduate might need in the field. He dressed in the standard trial uniform and made his way through the Academy's corridors. Other students moved with the same purpose, all heading toward the same destination. But there was a different energy today, a tension that crackled through the air like static electricity. Final trial day. The Crucible's antechamber was already crowded when he arrived. Students clustered in groups of 4, reviewing strategy or simply trying to manage their nerves. In the center of the room, a large display showed the squad assignments. His name appeared with Nithra, Vexhai, and Mortis, just as they'd requested. They were already there, standing apart from the other squads. Each wore their trial uniform differently, but all three looked every inch the elite warriors they'd been trained to become. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and Nithra nodded once. A simple acknowledgement, but he could read the determination in all their expressions. They wanted this as much as he did. The trial supervisor, a grizzled veteran from some species Ivor didn't recognize, called for attention. The rules were simple, as they always were at Bloodwick. Enter the Crucible as a squad. Survive whatever the facility threw at them. Complete the objectives. Only one squad would graduate. Ivor's squad was called forward as the second group of the day. They stood before the Crucible's entrance, a seamless metal barrier that would open only when the trial began. The supervisor looked at them with the expression of someone who'd seen too many students fail these trials. "Last chance to reconfigure squads," he said. "No shame in it. Chemistry matters in there." None of them moved. The supervisor shrugged and activated the entrance. The metal barrier slid aside, revealing the Crucible beyond. A vast space filled with obstacles, weapons, and dangers that would shift and change throughout the trial. "Good luck," he said, though his tone suggested they'd need more than luck. The 4 of them stepped into the Crucible together. The barrier sealed behind them with a soft hiss. They stood in what appeared to be a simple room, but Ivor knew that was an illusion. The Crucible would transform around them, creating scenarios designed to test every aspect of their training. "Ready?" Nithra asked. Before anyone could answer, the floor beneath them began to shift. Walls rose from the ground, obstacles descended from the ceiling, and the simple room became a complex urban environment. The trial had begun. A voice echoed through the facility's speakers, emotionless and precise. Scenario 1. Hostile territory. Navigate to extraction point. Eliminate threats. Protect civilians. Time limit, 30 minutes. Combat drones emerged from hidden alcoves throughout the urban maze. Not the simple training units from yesterday, but military-grade hunters equipped with lethal weapons. Between them, holographic civilians ran in panic, adding chaos to the environment. The squad didn't need to discuss strategy. They'd each studied the other's methods, understood their strengths. Nithra took point, her analytical mind already mapping patterns and predicting movements. She could see through the Academy's deceptions, identify which civilians were real and which were distractions. Vexhai melted into the shadows, becoming virtually invisible as she moved to flank the enemy positions. Her approach would be silent, surgical, eliminating key threats without triggering wider alarms. Mortes positioned herself where her presence would have maximum psychological impact. The drones were machines, but they had tactical AI that could be disrupted by fear algorithms, and her mere presence began affecting their targeting systems. Ivor went straight through the middle. He charged the main drone cluster, no weapon in his hands, relying on speed and unpredictability. Where the others were precise, he was chaos. Where they were elegant, he was relentless. But they worked together. When Nithra identified a pattern in the drone movements, she signaled Vexhai, who used the information to position herself perfectly for ambush. When Mortes disrupted a drone's targeting, Ivor was there to capitalize on the confusion. When Ivor drew fire and attention, the others struck from unexpected angles. They moved like a pack, each playing to their strengths, but unified in purpose. The first scenario ended with all threats eliminated and all civilians protected. They'd reached the extraction point with 8 minutes to spare. Scenario 2, structural collapse. Escape the facility. Save trapped personnel. Limited resources. The urban environment reconfigured itself into a damaged building, complete with unstable floors, blocked passages, and holographic personnel trapped in various locations. Again, they worked as one unit. Nithra analyzed the structural damage, identifying which routes were safe and which passages could be cleared. Vexhai scouted ahead, moving through spaces too dangerous for the others. Mortes used her intimidating presence to keep panicked civilians calm and organized. Ivor did what humans did best. He went where no sane being would go, manually clearing obstacles and creating new paths through sheer stubborn refusal to accept that something couldn't be done. They saved everyone. Every single trapped person was evacuated safely. Scenario 3, squad combat. Eliminate opposing team. The facility transformed one final time, becoming a multi-level arena. On the opposite side, another squad took position. 4 of the Academy's other elite students, each one a perfect example of their species' approach to warfare. The opposing squad moved with textbook precision. Perfect coordination, flawless execution, optimal use of terrain and resources. Ivor's squad fought like nothing in the textbooks. They didn't follow the rules. Instead, they created their own. Nithra identified the opposing team's strategy before it could fully deploy, allowing Vexhai to disrupt their formation from an impossible angle. Mortes turned the arena's psychological pressure against their opponents, while Ivor did something that no tactical manual would ever recommend. He ignored the optimal approach entirely and did whatever would be most effective in the moment. Where the opposing squad was perfect, they were unpredictable. Where the opposing squad followed doctrine, they improvised. Where the opposing squad expected patterns, they gave chaos. But it wasn't random chaos. It was controlled, directed, channeled toward a single purpose: victory. The trial is complete, announced the emotionless voice. Victor, Squad 7. The arena's barriers dropped. Emergency medical teams rushed in to check on the defeated squad, though they were uninjured. Just defeated. The opposing squad leader, a tall humanoid with crystalline skin, looked at them with something approaching respect. How, she asked. We analyzed your individual fighting styles, prepared counters for each of you. That's the problem, Nithra said. You analyzed us individually. We don't fight individually, Vexai added. We hunt in packs, Mortes finished. The trial supervisor was waiting when they emerged from the crucible. He looked at the four of them with something that might have been amazement. Congratulations, he said. You're the first squad to complete all scenarios with perfect scores. What about the other squads? Ivor asked. The supervisor gestured toward the display showing trial results. Squad eliminated. Squad eliminated. Squad eliminated. All of them. All but yours. The rules said only one squad would graduate. They didn't specify how many students that squad had to have. The four of them looked at each other, and for the first time since the trial began, they smiled. Years later, when they'd become legends in their own right, people would ask what made their partnership so effective. The answer was complex, but it came down to a simple truth. Nithra had taught them that perfect analysis was the foundation of victory. Vexai had shown them that patience and precision could accomplish the impossible. Mortes had demonstrated that psychological warfare was as important as physical combat. And Ivor had taught them all that sometimes the best strategy was to refuse to accept that you could lose. Together, they'd learned that the galaxy was big enough for every approach to survival. That strength came in many forms, that the most dangerous predators were the ones that chose to work together. And that sometimes, the best way to prove you belonged somewhere wasn't to beat everyone else. It was to make everyone else stronger. The final lesson of Bloodwick Academy had nothing to do with combat techniques or survival protocols. It was about understanding that a pack was always more dangerous than a lone wolf, even when that wolf happened to be human.